Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on countering greenwashing through transparent communications. This webinar has been one of our most popular to date, and it's great to see so many of you joining us live today from all over the world. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to share with you afterwards via email, along with a PDF of the slides. If we move on to the next slide, here you can see an overview of today's speakers. My name is Madeline Bertie and I am the Propositions Marketing Manager at the Carbon Trust. I'll be hosting the audience Q&A at the end of today's webinar. You'll have the opportunity to submit your questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You can send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and address them during the audience Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Also from the Carbon Trust, I'm joined by our Marketing and Communications Director, Julia Nikawara. Julia spent 10 years in FMCG communications and the past 8 years in sustainability communications, and she will be taking us through the current greenwashing landscape and how the Carbon Trust can support you. We're delighted to be joined by two guest speakers today. Lucas Boudet, Director General of the European Advertising Standards Alliance, and Rob Don, Assistant Director at the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, who will both be sharing solutions to tackling greenwashing. And on to the next slide. As a recap of the agenda for today, we will begin with some background context around greenwashing. We'll hear from our guest speakers on tackling greenwashing and share how the Carbon Trust supports transparent communication before moving into the audience Q&A. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first speaker, Julia Nikawara from the Carbon Trust.
Hello, everybody. My name is Julia Nikawara. I'm the Marketing and Communications Director at the Carbon Trust. The Carbon Trust is a mission-led climate consultancy. We have been pioneering decarbonisation for over 20 years, and that remains our mission. We work with businesses, governments, financial institutions, and public sector organisations and support their transition to net zero. Be that through supporting on strategy, delivery and reporting, or through working on assuring and labelling the actions organisations have taken, all the way through to big market transformation work, which is very often cross-sector or cross-industry. We are a team of over 400 experts and consultants spanning across 5 continents. And we have been working with hundreds of businesses across many sectors and countries, which gives us a lot of experience and also a lot of sector-specific knowledge, in particular in the sector, in the topic that we're going to talk about today, which is greenwashing. So what is greenwashing? Why is it more visible? And what can be done about it? So very simply put, greenwashing is the practice by which companies claim they're doing more for the environment than they actually are. And there are many shades of greenwashing, as you can see on this chart here. I won't go in through all of those today, but that makes it even more confusing. So why is this more visible and why has this increased? Well, there are a couple of reasons that I think are very important to note. Actually, one of the reasons why greenwashing has increased is because climate commitments are on the rise. So actually companies overall are doing more, or at least are committing to doing more. At the same time, consumers are more informed. We know this from our own research that we've conducted over the last few years. Consumers increasingly seek to buy more sustainable products and therefore seek information about which product is sustainable, which obviously makes then brands, products, companies incentivized to make products more attractive in that way and present environmental credentials in that way, which actually also goes for employees who are looking to work for organizations who are committing to do the right thing for the environment. So this is the reason why we see more environmental claims and unfortunately mistaken environmental claims. And it's really startling to see some of the numbers here, but it's very clear that that greenwashing is on the rise and is a growing problem. And when you think about greenwashing, it's really a variety of things that can go wrong in communication that makes it greenwashing. That can be a vague claim. It can be language that is unclear. Very often we see statements that give the impression that a product has no negative impact on the environment, and actually any product will have an impact on the environment. We also see a lack of accessible adequate explanation, so no backup for the claims. We see an increase in own brand eco labels and logos, which come without any third-party verification or assurance. And we also see hiding, omitting, or very little information in order to appear more eco-friendly. So why is this a problem? It's a problem for three very big and important reasons, really. The first one is overall the impact on the environment. This is a collective problem that requires collective action, and greenwashing, which gives the impression that more is being done than actually is, hampers progress. It hampers decarbonisation, progress and impact. And that's very important for our future. The second reason why greenwashing should be tackled is impact on brand or organizational trust. Being seen to lack transparency, being seen to try and mislead, impacts brand trust and decreases brand trust and credibility, which in turn obviously leads to commercial implications and revenue implications potentially over time. And finally, the evolving regulatory framework means there is an increasing risk of lack of compliance, actually, when it comes to green and environmental claims. So it's really important that those who are in charge of communicating around green claims are really aware of the pitfalls and how those can be avoided. So how do we do that? How do we tackle greenwashing? Well, we know this is an issue, and all of you listening today are probably facing to a degree this issue. We know that companies are looking to do the right thing, are looking to communicate with transparency and integrity, and want to be honest with clients and customers and consumers, but it is not always easy, and it is not always clear how to do this. So I have the pleasure to hand over now to our second speaker, Lucas Boudet, who will provide an overview of what support and solutions are available from the EASA.
Hello, everyone. It's my great pleasure to be with you today and talking about advertising self-regulation. How does it help tackle greenwashing? How it helps businesses getting green claims right? And how it helps businesses communicate about the positive aspects of their products, services, or companies while staying clean from greenwashing. So I'm going to present how does collective advertising self-regulation system work. So we call it first collective because it's not just one company taking commitments, it's whole industry coming together. And we call it a system because it's not just about having rules, but a whole system to ensure that the rules are known, raise awareness about them, and ensuring that they are properly applied. So I'll take you through all of the components of the chart that you see on the left-hand side. So let's start first with the different rules and the landscape. You can go to the next slide. So as you can see here, there's several logos of different industry associations that are members of EASA, the organization I represent. They represent the whole of the advertising value chain, those who commission the ads, those who create the ads, those who disseminate the ads, so advertisers, agencies, media, and all forms of media, whether it is newspapers, magazines, outdoors, digital platforms. And why do they come together? Because they have a business interest in ensuring that this consumer trust. 30 to 50% of a brand's market capitalization comes from reputation. So they have no interest in deceiving consumers. And this is why they come together to create a set of rules and a system to ensure that. And the second thing is also to create a level playing field. It means responsible players want to set the strictest standards, but they want to make sure that it applies to everyone in the industry. We can now get to the next slide. So this whole responsible industry comes together, and first they will set self-regulatory rules. But of course, such rules don't operate in a vacuum. First and foremost, there's national and EU law, so self-regulation does not replace law, it complements it. It covers areas that maybe that the law can't cover, such as, for example, taste and decency. What is indecent may be against SR rules, but still legal. Also, law acts as a legal backstop. It means consumers can always go before the courts, but on top of that, they can also go through self-regulatory solutions. I'll come back to that. And EU law actually recognizes advertising self-regulation in many instruments. One of them is the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which actually calls for the fostering of self-regulation through codes of conduct drafted at national level. Now, if you talk about claims really quickly, because it's huge, but to say there's several instruments covering that right now at European level, the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, UCPD, which covers issues of misleading and aggressive commercial practices. It's complemented by a guidance that has been recently updated, which has a whole chapter on green claims. And looking to the future, these upcoming directives empowering the consumer for the green transition, covering issues, for example, of generic claims, future environmental performance, and also substantiating green claims, like rules of what methods to use to substantiate claims. So that's the legal background. Now, if we move one step up, on top of that, we have self-regulatory codes. There's the global standard, which is the ICC code, which dates back to 1937, with principles saying that advertising should be legal, honest, truthful, and decent. Truthful, you see, so the principles still apply today, and it has a full chapter on environmental claims, chapter D, and is accompanied by also dedicated guidance on responsible environmental marketing. So these principles of the ICC code are then embedded in national self-regulatory codes. That's the next box, as you can see. So it takes those principles and adapts it to the local context. There's different legislation in different countries, different sensitivities, different languages. So it really applies it more specifically to a given market. On top of that, there can also be sectorial commitments, especially, for example, in sectors that are under scrutiny. I'm thinking about alcohol sector, gambling sector. And when it comes to environment, the World Federation of Advertisers has developed the Planet Pledge with several pillars. And one of them is actually the substantiation of green claims. And they've developed a global guidance on environmental claims. Moving up, of course, companies can go up and beyond and have their own commitments. It's not all of these layers working against one another. It's all of this working together that ensures a high level of consumer protection. And I think the next speaker will be talking about the Green Claims Code of the CMA. It's interlinked, it's part of that ecosystem. It relates to the UCPD's transposition in the UK. And I think they've also worked closely with our UK member, the Advertising Standards Authority, in the drafting of this code. So to say it's really an ecosystem of solutions that ensures high level of consumer protection. So that's about the rules. Let's go to the next slide. So here, just to focus quickly on national rules to say that basically we got you covered. Our network has either specific sections on green claims in their own codes or in separate codes that stand next to the general code. And even if there is no such instrument, the provisions of the ICC code, the global standard applied and cover such matters. And even to the extent where sometimes there's issues of green hushing. So that's where it's really important to have organizations that are able to guide companies to do it right, whilst allowing them still to communicate about their products and services. So that's about the rules. Now let's go to the next slide and see another feature of self-regulation. Is really what we call self-regulatory organizations They're based in many different countries in Europe, even beyond. So here I'll mention our sister organization, EASA, the International Council for Ad Self-Regulation, which covers a network of SROs in Europe and beyond, America, Asia, Africa, so I think in 16 more markets in total. So to say that there is a network of self-regulatory organizations that enforce advertising codes. In Europe, we cover 96% of the EU population. So what do these self-regulatory organizations do? So of course enforce, but what does it mean? Let's go to the next slide to see what we're talking about. We can first start here on the upper right-hand side corner of this box. So first, and I'll deep dive into all of those in the following slides, just to give you an overview. First of all, it's really training. It's great to have rules. So SROs act as a platform for the industry to create rules, but then it's important that actually those who apply them are informed and know about it. So this training is a big chunk of the activities of SROs. Then there's a lot of work done behind the scenes, which means it's before the ad campaign is rolled out, to make sure that ads are compliant, whether it's non-binding opinions regarding the compliance of, say, for example, a creative or a brief vis-a-vis codes and regulation. That's what we call copy advice, and it can also be mandatory in some cases for broadcast in some countries. This is what we call pre-clearance. And then when the ad campaign is out, there's, in the absence of complaints, there's monitoring. So it means self-regulatory organizations can, on their own initiative, like for example, monitor a specific sector in even specific moment in time, like at Christmas. Let's look at ads related to, for example, toys. And it can also be on the demand of a given company or a given sector that want to check how they fare against SR and regulation. It's, I would say, confidential. So it means that if the results are not that great, they can analyze where they can improve. And if the results are good, it's also a good PR tool. And last but not least, they can always still, besides all of this, bad ads can be featured. And that's why the last resort is consumers and beyond stakeholders can file complaints against ads they would feel in breach with rules. And it's a feedback loop. The good thing is that self-regulatory organizations, because they handle such complaints, they have an acute knowledge and understanding of what's at stake, what are the problems, and it allows to adapt the rules accordingly. To change legislation takes time, a couple of years. Self-regulation, we can create quickly guidance, like in a matter of 6 months, for example. So it's really a reactive system and self-feeding as well to self-improve automatically. Now we can deep dive into prevention, for instance. So let's go to the next slide. So our network, actually 18% of self-regulatory organizations provide training specifically on green claims in advertising. They are targeting marketers, of course, regulatory affairs specialists, and here you can see influencers. Marketers know that they're marketers, but influencers sometimes and often, they don't know that themselves are sometimes advertisers. If they promote a pair of shoes they got for free, they may well be advertisers. So it means a community that's massive and don't know that there are actually rules that they need to respect. So there's a lot of efforts done to train influencers. And like brands, it's the same thing. They don't want to deceive their followers / consumers. It means if they do that, they lose the whole credit and the value that they are providing. So they fully understand that they have an interest in acting responsibly. I'll come back to that later of what we're doing in that respect. So that's prevention. We can go to the next slide just to show a few numbers. I talked about all of the actions where the ads are reviewed before a campaign is rolled out. As you can see, our network has reviewed over a year around 188,000 pieces of content, just to give you some idea of the volume. And this means that it's ads that are bad ads that are avoided. Like an example, I think in France, if I'm not mistaken, just to give you an example, I think that 10% of the copy advice, the request for compliance check before the ad is featured, 10% of that was relating to green claims. And I think 90% of that actually was in breach. So the good thing is that SROs, not only would they say that it's in breach, but we'll find solutions of how to amend the advertising to make it compliant with the codes. So it goes behind the scenes, but it's really a good tool to help responsible marketers get it right. And in the next slide, we're going to see that it's a system and a service that's super quick. So in the next slide, we can see that almost all of the copy advice is run in 72 hours. So I entice every one of you, if you want to make sure that your ads are compliant, to reach out to your local SRO and seek such copy advice. So here I covered everything if it goes before the ad campaign is rolled out and what happens afterwards. So in the next slide, we're going to see what we call data-driven self-regulation. So it was like theoretical 5 years ago. Pioneers SROs like 3 years have implemented AI technology to monitor online ads and influencer posts at scale. Now it's 16 markets that are being involved in such solutions. So really the idea is to automatically identify massive amounts of content, to identify those where there can be a breach. Then it allows, as always, human reviewers to make the final checks, but it allows to cover much more content than previously. In the next slide, I'll focus on two specific examples, maybe. Just many more, but in the UK, for example, they are reviewing websites of energy suppliers, pump manufacturers to try to identify sentences, and I think there's 160,000 sentences that were analyzed to identify first green claims and suspicions of green claims that would not be responsible. So they're training the algorithms to allow to ease the filtering. And these days in the UK now they're working on other type of topics such as air travel, electric vehicles, and food waste. EASA is also working on influencer posts, but I won't develop that right now. In France, same thing, they're automatically monitoring a series of websites several times a day to identify financial, health, or environmental claims. And I'd like to focus on the effort they're doing right now on influencer marketing. They've created an influencer marketing certificate. We are maybe seeing to what extent we could expand it beyond France to many countries in Europe to be defined. But the element is first to train, as I said, influencers about self-regulatory rules, and so they have a training module. One of the chapters is totally dedicated to environmental claims. They also provide even further knowledge and information. They mentioned the IPCC, for example, really to train influencers about the issues of environment. And then if the influencers successfully pass the test after the training module, they get a certificate, but it has value in the sense that then it's being monitored. And for instance, ARPP automatically through AI are reviewing like around more than 12,000 posts every year to check for compliance on these rules. So that's monitoring. If you now go to the complaints, which is, I would say, the last resort, as I said, is about like 60,000 complaints being handled every year. On the chart, what you can see is maybe the size of the blue bar compared to the green and red. It just shows that actually lots of the work is done even behind the scenes and before the ads are out. So preventive work is super important. Of course, there's always complaints. 89% of complaints come from consumers, but also it's interesting to see that it comes from competitors, but also from NGOs, interest groups, and for authorities for 1%. So it's open to everyone. In the next slide, we're going to see that it's super quick. 67% of complaints are handled in a couple of weeks. So you can always go before the courts. It will just take a bit more time. Moving on. Most ads complained about are featured online, followed by television and outdoor. No wonder, because of course, most of the ad spend is online. So I think that reflects such a reality. In the next slide, we can see that it's mostly complaints about, in the next slides, retail, leisure, health, services. And now let's look at in the next slide into what's being complained about. So mostly, as you can see, misleadingness for 61%, followed by social responsibility, taste and decency. Misleading includes misleading green claims. So now in the next slide, you're going to see how we break it down. So as you can see, actually, the number one, we have issues of availability claims, followed by price claims, and for 15%, environmental claims. And for the last section, a quick note on raising awareness, because it's great to have rules, great to have systems, but it's more important and more efficient if stakeholders know about it. So in the next slide, we can even skip 2 slides, if you may, the next one as well, and the next one. Yeah, exactly. So EASA celebrated its 30th anniversary last year. So we had a campaign focusing not on self-regulation per se, but on what we bring, what value we bring. So how do we address greenwashing, influencer marketing disclosure, and misleading advertising? So here is EASA as the central organization, the umbrella organization. But what's more important is actually communication as well at national level before the consumers and local companies. In the next slide, you just see 2 examples of ad campaigns. There are many more across the network. In the EASA, the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK ran several campaigns. And the great thing is when consumers see that actually ads are being regulated, there's a watchdog out there, it increases trust in advertising. And it also raises trust and awareness about the existence of the EASA and the ability to file complaints. And here an example of France, if I translate, is greenwashing. It's always the others till the day see you. So it's here to raise awareness about the fact that everyone, if you're responsible, you need to get your act together and check your own ads as well. And this is why we are there. So in the last slide, I just wanted maybe to reiterate the fact that advertising self-regulation is there to ensure that advertising is responsible, and we are there to help you get your green claims right. So don't hesitate to contact your national SRO to get advice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucas. Very, very interesting and informative advice and solutions from the EASA. And now I'm going to hand over to Rob Don from the CMA to talk through the Green Claims Code in the UK.
Yeah, hello everyone. Just to check that you can all see and hear me okay.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Good, good. So it's I'm joining on a smartphone because of some software compatibility issues, so it's kind of hard to know. Thanks. So yeah, thank you for inviting me today. I'm in the Consumer Enforcement Directorate in the CMA, and it's a pleasure to get a chance to talk to you all about the Green Claims Code, which obviously applies in the UK. If we could just move to the first of my slides, thanks. So a little bit of background to it. Obviously the sort of motivation for coming up with the Green Claims Code was firstly the CMA wants to make sure that consumers are not being misled by environmental claims, and secondly we want to make sure that businesses feel confident in navigating the law in this area. So to that end, we launched the Green Claim Code final guidance in September 2021. There is a dedicated microsite for it, which if you're able to click the link in the slides, it will take you there, but a quick Google will also find it as well. So there's a variety of materials there, obviously the guidance itself. There's also a video, which we'll watch in a second. There's a short guide for consumers on how to spot questionable claims, and there is a quiz about what claims might mean. The code itself is basically 6 principles that come from existing consumer law. The underpinning from it is the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008. In particular, those underpinning regulations make clear that traders must not mislead consumers either through actions that they take or omissions from what they do, and also that obviously traders must act in a professionally diligent way in everything that they do. So as we'll see as we go through this, the sort of the code, which hopefully lots of you are familiar with already, it really is sort of common sense and kind of the sort of behavior that you'd expect to see from a responsible seller who's kind of wanting to win and preserve the trust of their customers. So I think we'll move to the video. I think we have to sort of come off the slides possibly to do this. There we go. Right, there we go. So there's a video that shows it more articulately and charismatically than I could. But just quickly on this slide to recap the 6 principles then. Claims need to be truthful and accurate. They need to be clear and unambiguous. They must not omit or hide important information. Any comparisons that your claims are making must be fair and meaningful. The claims must be substantiated, and they must consider the full life cycle of a product or a service. To say those are sort of pretty straightforward, uncontroversial things, at least in my view. If we could just move to the next slide then, please. Thank you. So this is really a slide about what the CMA is doing in this space. So having set out what we think the law requires of traders and our expectations in terms of accurate claims, we've moved from providing guidance to ensuring compliance. Our compliance work so far, we are in the middle of enforcement action in the fashion sector, in particular against 3 traders, ASOS, Boohoo and George by Asda. That work is ongoing. There'll be updates in due course. We have recently announced a second phase of compliance work looking at household essentials or fast-moving consumer goods. This will start as a compliance review, looking at a range of products which are household essentials, so food and drink, household care and personal care products. So obviously these are things that consumers have little choice about needing and which they're probably buying week in, week out. The next steps in this work will depend on what we find, but obviously could involve formal enforcement action or us engaging with companies to encourage them to change their behaviour if we find non-compliance. The middle bottom box there with the question marks, I think, indicates that sort of which sectors we might look at next. We don't quite know, no decision yet taken, but this is intended to be a rolling programme of compliance work, so there will definitely be further phases. And then on the soft power side, this is really just to describe what else does the CMA do to help prevent greenwashing. On the one side, we're obviously always involved in providing advice into government about ways in which greenwashing could be reduced. In particular, that might come through the Digital Markets Competition and Consumer Bill. So advice to Secretary of State, I guess that slide did refer previously to BEIS. Obviously, with the machinery government changes, our interaction on greenwashing might be with a few different departments, with business and trade, with energy security and net zero, with science, technology and innovation as well. And the CMA is also very active in ICEPEN, which is the International Consumer Protection and Enforcement Network, basically a group of consumer and competition agencies across Europe, but also across the world, many of whom are finding the same practices, and there's very close collaboration in terms of trying to work out the best approaches to minimising greenwashing and making sure that environmental claims can be understood by consumers and that fair behaving businesses can navigate the law. So that's the end of my comments. I think on the next slide we just got my contact details and also the misleading green claims email address. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you to Lucas as well for sharing your guidance with us all today. So clearly there is a lot of support and guidance out there, and I urge you all to reach out if you need support or advice when it comes to transparent communications. I'll say a few words about how the Carbon Trust can also help in that respect. We work with many businesses across a variety of sectors, as I mentioned, manufacturing, services, to help them take action when it comes to climate. That can be emissions reduction, setting science-based targets, net zero commitments. So we really work with a lot of businesses who are taking climate action, and they want to communicate their achievements. They want to communicate their commitments. If you go to the next slide, we support with that communication. And of course, we're very much aligned with the guidance that you've heard earlier. And we have very clear principles of communication. And I know they might seem common sense, but you'd be surprised at how many times we see they're actually quite difficult, or how often mistakes can be made. So I'll run through them quickly because hopefully you will remember them and employ them in your communication. Be factual. Use facts, use numbers, rather than generic claims. And linked to that, be evidence-based. So really bring in the substantiating evidence behind a claim that you are seeking to make. Make that specific. So for example, refer to a clear boundary when you're describing a particular claim. If it refers to only one country, make sure that it doesn't sound like it refers to more than one country or it's global, for example. Be specific when you're making comparisons. Be really clear what you're comparing, and make sure that those two are indeed comparable, as we heard from Rob earlier. And also be very clear on data sources. It's really important to be transparent about the source of information, the source of the data you are providing, and of course make sure that that data source is credible. Let me give you a few examples of some pitfalls that we've seen in our work with organizations. These are not real life examples. We have mocked them up to give a sort of generalized view of some of the mistakes that can be made. So a few flags here. The world's first carbon negative coffee brand. Why isn't this a clear, transparent green claim? Main reason is there is no international standard definition for carbon negativity. It is not clearly defined. There isn't a third-party standard for carbon negativity. Therefore, it's not a term that is clearly defined and understood. So making that claim doesn't provide clarity. Simply put, it's not clear what carbon negativity actually is. It just sounds very good. And actually, everything does have an impact on the environment. So this sounds as though this has a more positive impact on the environment than actually does. The second thing I would flag here is claims that are of the first or superlative type. It is very difficult to actually know whether a brand or a product is the first in one category. There might be others out there that you are not aware of. So it's very difficult to substantiate this claim. Moving on to the second example, Smartwash, a cleaner laundry detergent that helps the planet. So very difficult here to understand what cleaner, greener means. So what does that mean? Have they reduced their emissions? Is it linked to recycling, to recyclability? Is it linked to net zero targets? And what does it mean that helps the planet? So where is the specificity of this claim? It's very difficult to understand what actually makes this a green, clean product. So these are some examples of pitfalls. I will share now an example of a good example of communication when it comes to green claims. So this is the example of Kit Kat, a chocolate brand. You probably No, and this refers to the comparison between a vegan Kit Kat and a standard Kit Kat when it comes to carbon footprint. So here the comparison is clear. We are comparing a standard Kit Kat with a vegan Kit Kat. The boundaries are clear and explained. And Kit Kat has worked with the Carbon Trust to measure and reduce its carbon footprint. And it has used the carbon footprint label to communicate that on pack to consumers. So if you go to the next slide, I talked about the carbon footprint label as used by Kit Kat on the previous slide. I wanted to say a few words about third-party assurance and why this is important. A couple of reasons. The first is it's done to an internationally recognized independent standard. It is independently verified. So there is a third party that is verifying action taken and claims made. And when it comes to Carbon Trust assurance, we have very rigorous review process to support communication claims when it comes to the assurance services. So all of this is comes together as a strong builder of trust when it comes to communicating the achievements that a company has made. And in particular, our carbon footprint label. This label has been in the market since 2008. If you go to the next slide, this carbon footprint label has been here in the UK since before really eco-labeling became as visible and as mainstream as it is today. It is the most recognized environmental label globally. And we are continuously evolving it to add more information to make it ever more clear and transparent as the environment around us evolves. So you can see here, for example, we have added a panel on the right-hand side of the label that very clearly specifies what a company has achieved, what a company has done, what action they've taken that has been verified by the Carbon Trust and is now communicated to that brand's consumer in a very clear and simple way. And we're working continuously to make that ever clearer to consumers. So I wanted to share with you an example of how, in addition to the guidance and the support that is out there as shared by Lucas and Rob, the Carbon Trust has helped and is continuing to help businesses in their communication plans and supporting them avoiding the pitfalls of greenwashing. So I will attempt to summarize what we heard today before handing over to the moderated Q&A. The big themes of today's webinar are, first of all, false and misleading claims really undermine efforts that are being taken by those that are genuine leaders and taking genuine action, and actually slow down and undermine the potential of progressing towards net zero. It is important to take this seriously, and there are a few ways and a few areas where guidance and support can come from. That can be third-party assurance to international standards, which comes with an authority and a rigor, or collective advertising self-regulation, which helps the industry advertise responsibly. When it comes to some practical advice, be factual, be specific, evidence-based and clear, as opposed to vague and as opposed to omitting information when it is available. And do remember that every product does have an environmental impact. Don't suggest that a product and its production, and in fact its entire life cycle, can have an actual positive impact in its creation. Do remember that environmental work is a journey. It's not a completed task, it's a milestone, and actually it won't be a completed task until we have reached our ambition of net zero at a global level. When it comes to communication, in addition to remembering these principles and looking to employ them, there are sources of help, guidance, and information out there, and we at the Carbon Trust can help with that. And obviously, you all know, better safe than sorry. Don't hesitate to reach out to your local self-regulatory organisation to seek advice before developing any advertising. So I'd like to thank you all for listening. I'd like to thank our two speakers, and I am going to hand over to Maddie, who will be moderating our Q&A, as I know we've had a lot of questions coming in throughout the course of the webinar today. So Maddie, over to you.
Great, thanks Julia, and thanks our speakers Lucas and Rob. We've had, yes, an overwhelming number of questions come in from you all, so I would do my best to try and collate some of the most popular ones together and ask them to our speakers. We've got about 12 minutes remaining, so we will work through as many as we can. So to begin with, this was a popular question that was actually sent in advance of the webinar, and I think it would be really good to do a recap from our speakers. And the question is around how global and regional sustainability communications differentiates but also aligns. And the specific question was how to avoid greenwashing across international borders when a product is produced and sold in multiple countries. So I'll start with Julia from the Carbon Trust for your perspective on that.
Yes, thank you, Maddie. Excellent question. And we do work with global clients at the Carbon Trust, with many brands that sell their products across the globe. And I would say really the principles are the same. So being factual, being evidence-based, making sure that your claims are not bigger than your achievements actually are, applies whether you are working on global or local brand. I would add, though, that it is very important, and it is the brand owner's responsibility to be aware of any additional local regulatory framework or legislation to ensure that actually, should any changes be made, should you need to adapt claims or advertising, it should really be done in line with your local with the local legislation. So make sure the global communication is right first, and then ensure that you are aware of any additional local regulation or legislation and adapt accordingly, would be my advice.
Great, thanks. Lucas, anything to add?
Yes, I'm going to roughly echo what Julia has said, but maybe to say that there is no one size fits all. I think that it's a fact that there are multiple countries, multiple regulatory frameworks, multiple languages, multiple cultures, and this is why actually brands and companies have local sales teams, local marketing teams. So I think there's no one single solution. Nonetheless, I think I would echo the double approach. Is first, look at global guidance. I'm thinking about the ICC code, but there's others out there, because as indicated, the principles are the same. So first, it can make a quick check of roughly, are you in line? And then the second step is, of course, to go local. You can't avoid that. And maybe focusing on the countries in which you are targeting the most, for example, which type of consumers you're targeting. And in these countries, as indicated, maybe contact your local self-regulatory organization to get advice on that.
Great, thank you. And Rob, anything to add on this question?
I'll got myself off mute. I'm not sure I'm going to have anything much new to say. I think probably I echo what the other panelists have said, which is good advice. But yeah, I mean, I think I understand why it's been a popular question. It's always tricky for traders that have got multiple jurisdictions and different sets of rules. And I guess kind of post-Brexit, there's a particular concern about whether those rules are going to start to diverge more. But I think the reflections that have already been said are right. Kind of these, I think the sort of the guidance is fairly sort of common sense and uncontroversial, and therefore I think it's very likely to continue to be, you know, the same in all jurisdictions really. If you're being honest and truthful and accurate and substantiated with consumers, then you're going to be, you know, not just kind of engendering trust, but also sort of staying on the right side of the law. I think there are, you know, one or two tricky challenges coming around, you know, sort of labeling and what labeling might need to be there. But I think in terms of kind of making accurate claims, you know, the guidance that's there is the right one. So think global, then think about any local variations.
Great, thank you. Moving on to the next question. So what's come in is, I feel one of the main themes that we've covered is about being clear, being transparent, and having those as your main principles. But one of the questions is that in my sector, people are using carbon neutrality and net zero carbon interchangeably. And there's a risk of this being misleading, as perhaps there is just a lack of understanding of what those terms actually mean, both within the sector, but also to consumers. So I guess kind of twisting that into a question, what would be your recommendation to educate yourself more on what these terms actually mean? Perhaps Lucas, we start with you on this one. Any thoughts on that, educating yourself around the correct terminology?
Absolutely, but I think it's two sides of the coin. I think there's the education of the marketer. This is why self-regulatory organizations do have training programs that can provide further shed light onto these different concepts. But then the question is, of course, how is it perceived by the consumer? So if it's tricky, I would say to be more on the cautious side, right? And it's not because you understand the concept yourself that necessarily it will be understood by the consumer. So it could be ultimately even considered as misleading. So it's also put it to the test of the average consumer. And as already, I'm repeating myself maybe, but you can just go out to the SRO. They're handling consumer complaints. They are connected daily with consumers, so they can have that kind of angle of seeing how it could be interpreted by a consumer. So just go and seek advice as well.
Great, thanks, Lucas. Rob, anything to add on this in terms of that understanding between net zero, carbon neutrality, but other green claims?
Yeah, sure. Yes, I mean, I acknowledge that this is tricky. There are quite a few terms that don't have strict definitions. It is something that's part of the CMA's advice into government that, you know, there's a sort of a helpful role for government and policymakers to take in sort of helping to clarify some of these terms. But if we're working in the world where they aren't completely defined, I think the sort of the right approach to take is that if they are not well understood by the marketer, they're probably not well understood by the consumer. So referring to them without the sort of parameters or kind of borders of the evidence that were being talked about by all of us in our presentations is kind of not going to be enough substantiation to sort of either make sure the claims are kind of fully accurate or to make sure that consumers understand them. So I think it really is about providing sort of context and information around what you mean by a claim that's being made. Those kind of ill understood and ill defined terms on their own are probably not enough.
Great, thank you. Julia, anything to add to that?
A few thoughts on this one. Unfortunately, yes, the confusion between net zero and carbon neutrality is very visible, and there isn't an easy fix, I agree, and there isn't a sort of cross-sector, cross-country formalized definition, but there are ways of explaining it in a fairly simple way, where one would understand the main fundamental differences between those two. And for example, we've worked a lot on that. You can find a lot of information on our website where we've sought to explain it very clearly, or as clearly as possible, given that it is actually quite complicated. So there are resources out there, and I would also say you know, imagine that you are doing an advert for a skincare brand, and you're referring to that skincare's properties and why they help. As a marketeer, you would seek to understand those. You wouldn't refer to them without being clear and without being sure that they're true. It's the same with green claims. It's the same principle. It is the responsibility of the brand and the marketeer responsible, the communicator responsible to make sure that those claims are accurate. So appreciate the challenge that it's not as straightforward or as easy as it could be, but there are resources available, and please have a look at our website, for example, where we've explained the difference between carbon neutrality and net zero, and I'm sure there are other third-party resources available out there for those who want to understand more, and good to hear that there might be some standardization at government level potentially in the future as well.
Great, thanks, Julia. I was keeping an eye on the time. I think we've probably got time for one more question, so I will try and group a few in together. We've had a few questions around regarding the explanation of claims, and in particular, does it need to be on the advertisement itself, or can it be explained further on a website? Someone's asked, is it enough to substantiate it in sustainability reports, so annual sustainability reports? So perhaps I'll ask that as a broad question, and perhaps for Julia, you could give some examples of where we've seen Carbon Trust clients communicate their claims and what channels they've used to communicate about them.
Yes, I mean, I would say the guidance here is, if you can clarify it, do. Obviously, talking about products, there is, you know, very little space on packaging. If there isn't enough space there, I would urge you to add your website, for example, where more information can be provided, or a QR code where more information can be provided. So where you can, where you have time, where you have space, it's always better to provide more information than less. Where you cannot, make sure that you direct the consumer to wherever you are providing that additional information. Can be your sustainability report or your website. I'll stop there to give the others an opportunity to answer. Great,
thanks. Rob, any thoughts on that?
I thought that was a very good answer, just provided if you know, the information needs to be as easily accessible for the consumer as it can be, and if that means it can't be directly on the packaging, then you need to direct them to exactly where it is. You know, we do see examples where consumers are directed by a QR code to a website, and you'd still have to spend 10-15 minutes digging to find the information. You know, to us that isn't really acceptable. It doesn't help the consumer. So it is really about, yeah, making that information as easily accessible as it can be.
Great. And Lucas, any final thoughts?
I would just strictly concur, be as close as possible to the consumer. So it's made immediate, and as much as you can say right away is much better than have a long journey to find that information. I just agree with the previous speakers on that.
Great, thank you. So we are at 12 o'clock in the UK, 1 o'clock if you're joining us from Europe or wherever you're joining us from. We have reached the end of the webinar. So on behalf of the Carbon Trust, a big thank you for our attendees for joining us, and also to our guest speakers, some really great insights. As mentioned at the beginning, the webinar has been recorded. We will send it out to attendees afterwards via email, along with the slide deck as a PDF, and also the contact details for all of our speakers. So if you do wish to follow up with them with any additional questions, apologies, we had some really good ones in, and we simply, as always, ran out of time for those. But thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at a future Carbon Trust webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks very much, all.